Chuck began his prayer praying for the elders. And Chuck, I appreciate that. And I know Brian and Mike do too. And Chuck's not the only one that does that. Often when someone stands up and leads a prayer, they mention specifically the elders. And I just want you all to know that means so much to us that are trying to do this. I have served my Lord in many capacities. Now, this is the third time I've served a congregation as an elder. But I will tell you, I still don't, that is the most difficult, but where I feel the most inadequate is trying to serve as an elder in the Lord's church. I can feel like I can do everything else, and sometimes I feel, well, I'm doing okay there. But I feel the most inadequate when I think about my work as an elder. And I bet you've got three humble men here serving as elders. I bet they feel the same way that I do sometimes. And your prayers really mean a lot. And so we're going to be talking about elders this morning from a text that is not often discussed concerning elders, but that's what this is talking about. It's talking about the elders that rule well. So let's look at the text. 1 Timothy 5, 17 through 20. Let the elders that rule well, that's where I got the title here, be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in the word and doctrine. For the scripture says, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward. Against an elder, receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. Them that sin, rebuke before all, that others may fear. Let's talk about the elders here. Mentioned twice in this passage, the elders, and then against an elder, the elders. Who are the elders? Now, they're not just elderly men. And you might get that impression reading through 1 Timothy, because he's been talking about the widows and the aged widows, and then he starts talking about elders, and you might think he's talking about just elderly men. But it's not just elderly men, because these are elders that rule. And all elderly men do not have rule in God's church. So this is talking about that office of an elder. Now, there's qualifications for that office. They're called bishops earlier in this book, 1 Timothy 3, 2 through 7. And I didn't get all of the passages there mentioned because I'm not going through the qualifications here. But it does say a bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant. And there are just certain qualifications that men are to have if they're going to serve a congregation as bishops or as elders. Now, how do you know these are the same thing? Well, it's in Titus. In the book of Titus, we have these qualifications, and they're almost the same, but it says, and ordain elders in every city as I have appointed thee. And then it goes down to verse 7, for a bishop must be blameless. Who's he talking about? The elders and the bishops. It's 2 different words describing the work of that office. When you think of an elder, you should think of those who are spiritually mature. And you've got to live a certain kind of life to be the husband of one wife, and then talks about your children. And these are children that are making decisions as adults, so faithful children. So there's a certain amount of time you do have to live in order to be an elder, but it's really talking about spiritual maturity that goes along with that, not just age. The idea of a bishop, well, the word literally means an overseer. And so you've got elders that are overseers in the Lord's churches. Now, this goes back a long way. We who are serving as elders, we're in a work or have a responsibility that goes way back. When Moses was in the wilderness and his father-in-law came to him in Exodus chapter 18, and there was just too much on Moses for all these people. And the advice was, you need to select some men that meet certain qualifications to help you in shepherding these people through this wilderness. Later we read like in the book of Ruth, when Boaz is going to make sure everything is right with him to marry Ruth, what does he do? He goes before the elders of their city. So they're in Bethlehem. They had elders overseeing the things that went on in Bethlehem, in their city. And then we read in Mark chapter 5 and verse 22 about the elders in a synagogue. And so these synagogues were little communities. Now that's much like our congregations. In fact, there were synagogues scattered throughout the Roman Empire, and multiple synagogues in these cities. And these synagogues had elders that were looking after, overseeing the affairs of those synagogues. Well, that makes an easy transition then, doesn't it? Into elders in the church. And so there's a precedent set already. Well, how are we going to oversee these congregations that are meeting, these churches of Christ? How do you work that? Well, the precedent had already been set. There are elders that will oversee those congregations. Perhaps the first mention of elders in the New Testament is James chapter 5 and verse 14. It talks about those who are sick to call for the elders and let them pray. And so we see elders there are looking after and caring for the members of that congregation. That's how they're introduced to us. In Acts 14 and verse 23, Paul is on his first missionary journey, and he's appointing elders in every city. That means there'd be elders in Derbe and Lystra and Iconium and in Antioch. Well, how could that be? Well, remember now, these are spiritually mature men. They'd probably already served as elders in synagogues. And now the church is here, and so it's very easy for them to transition then as elders into the church. In Acts chapter 15 and verse 2, that's where we read about elders in Jerusalem. In 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 12, there's elders of the church in Thessalonica. In Acts 20 and verse 17, there's elders overseeing the church at Ephesus. In Philippians 1:1, elders at Philippi. Titus 1 and verse 5, appoint elders in every city. The little island of Crete had little communities all over it. They're called cities. Now, don't think New York City. It wasn't big cities, but they're just these little villages, cities all over. And as churches were established in these places, appoint elders in those cities, in those churches. 1 Peter 1. Peter is writing to the churches of Bithynia and Asia and Cappadocia and Pontus. There's one other of those cities. Those regions in now what we call northern Turkey. And he writes in verse 5 that I write unto you elders as an elder. So there's elders in those churches there. All throughout the New Testament where we read about where there were churches of Christ, we read about elders overseeing that work. The last reference we have to elders in the New Testament is Revelation chapter 4 and verse 4. The 24 elders that are around the throne. And when Christ comes to the throne, what does it say they do? They cast their crowns before the throne. Well, the symbolism there is pretty obvious. These elders, they're submissive to Christ. They don't want any glory to them to detract from the glory of Christ. Christ is their authority, and they just cast their crowns before the throne. Well, they're called the elders. It's men of mature spiritual development, that are highly esteemed, and they've been overseeing the Lord's work. And so there they're called the 4 and 20 elders in the book of Revelation. Now the elders rule. Now, the idea of a ruler doesn't sit too well with men. It never really has. You mean someone's going to tell me what to do? And that just doesn't sit well. Rules, you know. But elders do rule. It says the elders that rule. That word rule carries with it the idea of rank. And anyone that can think about military, you know, you have the ranking officer. There's people of rank. There's an authority chain there. And so elders have rank. That's in that word rule. Look how this word is used elsewhere in the New Testament. In 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 12, we beseech you, brethren, know them which labor among you and are over you. That's rule. That's the word. They rule you. They're over you in the Lord and admonish you. What about a father? One of the qualifications of an elder is that he has ruled well his own house. That's 1 Timothy 3, verses 4 and 5. One that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. If a man don't know how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? What authority does a father have over his children in his home? So elders have authority. We read in the book of 1 Timothy 3 and verse 12 about deacons ruling their children in their own houses well. So that's the idea of rule. That's the same word following through there. So elders rule, but they are to rule well. You see, there are different ways in which a person can rule. It's not an autocratic rule. If a man thinks now that I'm an elder, I'm a church boss, he doesn't understand how to rule well. Now, if you've got children, when they're little children, they got to learn that they're going to have to do what Daddy says. I mean, and you got to discipline to do that. As these children grow into adulthood, you don't just keep treating them like little children, do you? You kind of step back and you begin to rule in a different manner as your children grow. And that's the way you should. They will rebel against autocratic rule. And so it's a little different as they age and then on become adults even. And there's that relationship changes over time. What does it mean for an elder to rule well? Well, here's some that didn't rule well. And the elders in Jerusalem, when the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. Those men that the people in Jerusalem considered elders, they weren't ruling well when they did that. You see, with authority comes the danger of abusing authority. And elders are not to abuse the authority that they have. In 3 John verses 9 and 10, we read about a man that did this. I imagine he was probably one of their elders. His name is Diotrephes. Well, what does it say about him? Well, he loved to have preeminence among them. I mean, he thought he was the stuff. And then he did not rule well. It said, he received us not. If I come, I'll remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith. Neither does he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. Now that's not ruling well. 1 Peter 5 and verse 3. Or verses 1 through 3. The elders, here we're talking about the elders. The elders which are among you, I exhort, who am also an elder. Look at verse 2. Feed the flock of God. There might be a better way to translate that word feed. It's talking about the work of a shepherd watching after his flock. And maybe that word could be shepherd the flock of God, or this word, pastor the flock of God. When Chuck was saying his prayer, and I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but he talked about the elders. I think the elders that pastor. That's what that's talking about. Now, these shepherds with their flocks out there, they didn't have a whip to drive these flocks like a bunch of wild cattle. That's not what they were doing. My sheep hear my voice, and they know me, and they follow me. That's what Jesus said about his sheep. The 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, and think about how that sheep, they take comfort in the oversight of that shepherd. That might be a good model then to think, okay, elders, what are we doing? Do people have comfort in our oversight? And so they're to rule as a shepherd that cares for his flock, so that the sheep willingly will follow that shepherd. And then he says, neither is being lords over God's heritage. That's where the abuse can come in. Now, elders have authority. They have rank. That's in that word rule. You know what it is when someone pulls rank, don't you? And elders have that responsibility. And sometimes it might be that the elders are going to have to pull rank. But that should not be the standard mode of operation. It's not just about making sure. It's not just about issuing orders and expecting obedience. That's not ruling well. If an eldership has to pull rank, and maybe they will, they have the authority to do it, but if they do, something is wrong there. Maybe they haven't been nurturing that flock, or maybe the flock is just not responding to the nurture, because sometimes some hard decisions have to be made, and the elders just going to have to make them. And hopefully they don't have to pull rank. I don't think an elder's ever pulled rank on me. Now they could, and I would submit to it. But I'll tell you, the attitude we should have toward the elders is such that if that's what they want, that's what we're going to do. They don't have to order me. When I find out what it is that they're aiming at, I'm going to be in behind them and support them. And when people will respond to elders that way, elders never have to pull rank. They just let you know, we think it might be best to do it this way, and people, that's what we'll do. We'll, because of the respect they have for their elders. The elders have to earn that respect, and it comes with time. And it will come with watching how your elders deal with situations and problems. And as they do, the congregation, if they're ruling well, the congregation will grow to have that kind of respect for them. So they don't have to pull rank. They don't want to be lords over God's heritage. Now it says, let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor. And the honor here has to do with financial support. We talk about an honorarium sometime. When we pay someone, it's an honorarium. And we know that's what this is talking about, because it says, the scripture says, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward. Now, a lot of time we talk about paying preachers, but not as much about paying elders. And the reason is usually because by the time a man is an elder, he already has his own financial support, and he doesn't really need that, but he could have that. But again, you got to watch for abuse. 3 times. In 1 Timothy 3 and verse 3, talking about elders, they're not to be greedy of filthy lucre. In Titus chapter 1 and verse 7, it says it again, not greedy of filthy lucre. And then Peter says, in 1 Peter 5 and verse 2, they're to serve not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. If a man's getting into this work as an elder, if a man's into it for the money, he's in the wrong work, and he needs to get out of that. It's not about making money. But it does say that the elder is worthy of that support. So you've got to watch and make sure there's not abuse, like it is with the authority, so also with the money. You know, money just messes up so many things. Sometimes everything's just going on fine until the money shows up, and then money can just be such a problem. And it can be problems when it comes to elders as well. Now, talks about the work of an elder here is laboring in word and doctrine. A lot of time we look at elders, and it's easy to fall into this, and we have to guard this, and we three are conscious about this, but elders are not just decision makers. I mean, it's not just, well, we'll let the elders decide. This congregation functioned when I got here functioned very well without elders. The men would meet, we discussed things and came to a consensus on decisions that had to be made, business type decisions, like what to do with the auditorium and things like that. And you can do that. And a lot of time that'll just fall into the lap of elders, and it kind of has with us again. And we're not going to abuse that, or we don't want to abuse that. But there's something missing when you don't have elders. And it is the spiritual leadership and nourishment that elders provide. It's one thing to just make some decisions, but it's another thing to spiritually feed a flock. And that's what elders are to do. They labor in word and doctrine. That's not something that happens in a business meeting. And so that's in that work of the elder. Look how important this is in the New Testament. One of the qualifications, 1 Timothy 3:2, apt to teach. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 12, they admonish you. It has to do with that spiritual leadership. Ephesians 4 and verse 11 talks about the gifts given, and some were given to pastors and teachers. When you look at that list, really it's a compound idea here. The pastor teachers. It's talking about the shepherd teachers. It's one. You've got the prophets, evangelists, and pastor teachers, putting the emphasis on spiritual teaching onto the pastors. It says, Hebrews 13 and 7, talking about elders, remember them which have rule over you, the rule, who have spoken unto you the word of God. And in Titus 1 and verse 9, they're to be able to, by sound doctrine, to exhort and convince the gainsayers. That puts the role of the elders as spiritual leadership. And the manner in which they do this is through teaching. Now, this congregation is blessed. You have 3 teaching elders. That is such a blessing. And so that is a big work when it comes to the role of elders. Now, 19 and 20. Elders are men. They're not infallible. And they're subject to like passions as all men. And they're not always wise. And they're not always righteous. It says, against an elder receive not an accusation, but not ever receive an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. Then you receive an accusation. Against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses, and then them that sin rebuke before all, that others may fear. The fact that elders have such an important role. I know the church, we all come and we all struggle with sin. I mean, that just comes with us, and we're trying to help each other overcome sin and get to heaven. But it's one thing for just one of the members of the church to have a problem with sin. It's another when it's an elder. There's just more expected out of them because of the importance of what they do in a congregation. Them that sin rebuke before all. This reminded me of this verse. James 3 and verse 1, my brethren, be not many masters, knowing we receive the greater condemnation. Those with the most responsibility are the most accountable. Now, what happens when someone sins? Well, we go to them with the spirit of meekness, not with the idea of casting them aside, but to redeem them, to give forgiveness and redemption. It may be that when an elder sins, that elder might need to just step aside and says, I don't want to serve. I should not continue to serve as an elder because of this sin. It depends on the nature of the sin, and it also depends on the confidence that congregation is going to have in their ability to continue to be an elder. But elders, we're men, and men can be forgiven, and men can be redeemed, and elders can too. Now, I'm going to close with these two passages. What does a congregation owe their elders? And there's three things mentioned here. Know them. Now, that doesn't just mean I know their face and their name. That's one way to know them. But you need to know what kind of men they are and who they are and what their issues are and what their values are and how they live their life. They're to be examples for the flock. So get to know. Try to think, see if you can get inside the mind of your elders so that you can better be able to follow them. Know them that labor among you and over you in the Lord, and then esteem them. Now, we three elders get a lot of esteem from this congregation. That is a blessing for us as elders. But we need to think well of them and let them know we're glad you're one of the elders, and esteem them highly in love for their work's sake. It's not just the man, although he's got to have a character that matches, but this man is involved in this work, and for that reason, I'm going to esteem them very highly. And then be at peace among yourselves. That means so much to an eldership. Dealing with trouble and turmoil in a congregation is what? Well, that's what makes elders old men, okay? And if a congregation can be at peace among themselves, and that comes through maturing ourselves as individual members, that just lifts such a load off of the shoulders of elders. And then I'll end with this one, 1 Peter 5 and verse 4. It's a challenging work, and there's a lot of work. It's a work I hope the men here, even you young men, I want you to think about what it would be to be an elder and grow to be able to fill that role. But it says, when the chief shepherd shall appear, this is Peter talking about elders, you'll receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. That tells me this. God understands elders. He knows He's placed them in an important role. He knows they're fallible men trying to do what they can to serve the Lord in this very important role. And He loves men that will do this. And He'll give them a crown of glory that fadeth not away. He knows the struggles that elders go through. So that's the lesson on elders. You young men, I want you to think, I'm not going to be an elder. Well, not yet, but you can aspire to be one. And set that up as what the Bible teaches elders ought to be. I want to be that way because Mike, Brian, and I are only elders for a little while. Things will happen, and we won't be able to serve. We'll pass on. Others will need to fill our shoes, and so be ready when the time comes to step up and take on that role for the Lord's work. Now, you need to be a Christian, and so be baptized into Christ and live for Him. And if you need to respond to that invitation this morning, do it while we stand and sing.